that I have all my resources there. I haven't been able to go back to class myself. So, last part I wanted to talk to you about was some of these spies that we have. So, there was a group called the Culpeper Ring. The Culpeper Ring was a spy ring organized by Benjamin Talmadge. Benjamin Talmadge. Now, there's a series on, if you go on Netflix, called Turn. If you haven't seen that yet, it's a great series to watch. It's a great series to watch. It's clean. Everything's good about it. You can watch it, but it is based on historical facts. And Benjamin Talmadge was a real person, is a real person, and they used him on that show called Turn. So again, if you want to go look at that, it's I think 2 or 3 seasons. You can binge watch that. Be a lot of fun. You might learn some things. So, in any case, Benjamin Talmadge, under the order of General George Washington in the summer of 1778, he was a spy. All right. And they had this spy ring called the Culpeper Ring. Now, the ring's task was to infiltrate British controlled New York City. Now, it's something to know that we never had New York during that whole war. The Patriots never had New York, never could hold New York during that whole war. So the British had it. And that means they had um, total control of the harbor that whole time, too. So um, they were to report all the troops' whereabouts and all the extensions of the troops that they had and what was happening in the harbor. They were to report all that back to General Washington. Well, the ring conducted covert operations, means secret operations. And the end of the American Revolutionary War was coming to a close. All right, they started in 78. It was over in 81, pretty much, because this battle that we're going to be talking about in Section 4 kind of ended. It was like the battle of all battles. It didn't mean the war was completely over. The war was not done by 1781. It was not over yet. A lot of people think, well, that was the end of the war. It was not at the end of the war yet. Not yet. Now, there was one of those who allegedly aided the Culpeper Ring and was an operative known only as number 355. They were only known by numbers. Now, we already understand this because some of you have watched shows that have been on forever, starring somebody called 007. 007. Who's 007? Anybody? James Bond. James Bond, right? So this, that is nothing new. That is nothing new because they were doing this way back in the revolutionary times. Now, 355, the group's code was for 355 was a lady. So this was a lady spy. Now we're talking about some women spies. She was like the spy of all spies here. Some historians believe that she was the only member of the ring arrested by the British to hang for it. Nobody else was ever caught. Nobody was ever caught. But they think that she was caught and hanged as a spy. Others claim that she was a prisoner aboard this British ship called the New Jersey. Thing of it is, she disappeared. Like all good spies do, they just disappear and they're gone, right? Now, we were talking a little bit about invisible ink. There was this invisible ink that they would have, and if you could read it, sometimes on the top of the paper, they would put a message, like some of the messages that we did, they would put a message in with regular writings, and if you held it under a flame, the message would come alive. The message would come alive because it was written in invisible ink, and it does exist. Invisible ink, it does exist. So if there was an F on the paper somewhere on the corner, it meant use fire. If there was a C, it meant use chemicals. Because sometimes you'd have to put a chemical over top of it, and the chemical would react to that, and it would bring out the message. Very ingenious. Very ingenious way to do it. And there's a couple examples of it that you can go online and see examples of what the messages look like in invisible ink. And so they actually sell invisible ink today. So you're telling me spies are using invisible ink today? I think we're way past that. I think we're way past the invisible ink. It could happen, but I think we're way past the invisible ink time. All right, we're going to go into section 4. That was the end of section 3. That was the end of section 3. When you get back, we will definitely have guided reading 3 and guided reading 4. We'll go over that. We're going to go over the revolution a little bit more. We're going to go over parts of raised painting, and going to review on that and see some of the things that we knew. So let me just throw a couple things out here and see if you remember some things. First of all, what did the road mean that had the heavy hoof marks? The heavy hoof marks in the road. Those were all the mistakes that Washington had made, and his hard road as growing up as a military man, and those heavy hoof marks, I should say, not footmarks, hoof marks, were things like French Indian War. Kind of started that. Kind of started that. All right. What about the fox? What did the fox represent? Remember the times after he went to Trenton, and they went in Trenton, and they came back, and they were going down the river to Princeton, and they tricked Cornwallis, and that's when Cornwallis called him that old fox. That old fox. A couple of people started calling him the old fox because they just could not capture him. They couldn't capture him. Remember, Cornwallis said that old fox has done it to me again. So that's talks about the Battle of Trenton and crossing the Delaware. So you remember that? Go along with the fox. What about that bend in the road? You know, as it went up and Washington was sitting there on the horse and that bend in the road, that is the turning point of the war. And what battle was the turning point of the war? Well, you know what it was. It was Saratoga. Saratoga is the turning point of the war. Okay. So that bend in the road was a big difference in what was happening with that war because we took how many prisoners? 6,000 prisoners from Gentleman Johnny. You remember? General Johnny Burgoyne? Right. He gave up 6,000 prisoners. So that was a turning point in the war. And not only that, that is when France came in and signed the Treaty of Alliance. So all of that, because of that picture there, shows the turn in the road, the bend in the road. That was a turning point. Okay, let's see. What else do we know? We know about the 13 doves. All right, the 13 doves represent the 13 colonies, and they become 13 what? States. They become 13 states. And in the first dove is in his mouth is holding a ribbon that says the American crisis. American crisis represents what? That's right, Robert Paine, or that's Paine's um, journals and essays about the crisis, and that's what changed Washington's men's idea of crossing the Delaware because he had the crisis read to him. Right? They had the crisis read to him. All right, let's see what else. What else was in that dove's talons? Was an olive branch because we sent the olive branch petition to the king. And what did he do? Totally rejected it. So all these different little things that we're seeing uh, in that painting, and we haven't even got to some of the really good parts yet. So we're going to be talking about that too. So if you look on your PowerPoints that I sent you for Section 4, you'll see there's General Washington. He's riding right there, and he's riding with Rochambeau, who's in the let's see, he's standing there. He's on the left side, and one of his officers on the right side. So Rochambeau is the officer for all the French, and they are going to march together to a big victory. So let's go on a little bit. We're going to read about this. In 1781, the British generals were confused and in disagreement over their next move because France's entry into the war had complicated matters much. Also, Spain came into the war. Spain came into the war. You don't hear about it much, but remember Bernardo de Galvez? That's right. So after a series of victories over the British Navy, the French had won command of America's Atlantic coast. That is important, folks. That is important because all that blockade that was happening is starting to break away. It's starting to disappear because the French are coming with their ships, and they're just as good as the British ships, if some of them not even better. All right, the British saw France's presence as a challenge to their control of the sea. Well, I guess because we were no challenge to their sea power, but now the French are. All right. So, following the Patriots' hit and run type of attacks in the South, General Cornwallis left 7,500 troops. He led them north, trying to get to Virginia. All right, coming from Carolinas, going into Virginia, thinking we've got to find Washington and attack him and surround him. We got to take him out. That's all there is to it. But we need resupplied. We need supplies. We need men. We need something. So there was a place called Yorktown, Virginia. Yorktown, Virginia had a great fort there. He thought this would be a great port to be resupplied with supplies, and hopefully General Howe will be coming, and he'll bring some men, and General Clinton will be coming, and he'll be bringing some men, and we'll have a ton of guys here, and then we'll go after Washington, totally destroy this army, and the French with them. Best laid plans sometimes just don't seem to work out too well. Cornwallis thought this place on Chesapeake Bay here would be an excellent location. And so Cornwallis, let me flip this over a second. I'm looking at the same thing you are here. On August 29th, 1781, the French fleet of French Admiral François de Grasse anchored 29 warships. Now, I want you to know how many warships, okay? It was the French that anchored 29 warships in Chesapeake Bay. They totally blocked Cornwallis from receiving any supplies and from any ship leaving to get supplies. So it's the French with 29 warships. All right? Now, Washington's army of about 8,000 regulars and 3,100 militia arrived in Yorktown September 28th, 1781. Washington led his army out of Williamsburg to surround Yorktown, which was not far away. Not far away, okay? They had come from a place, let me see, what did they call that place? Well, it was in Virginia. They had stopped overnight at a big farm, and they were going to march on from there. Well, I can't remember the name of it right now. But they were marching there with Rochambeau, okay? And between 7,800 and 8,800 regular French troops under General Rochambeau will arrive with Washington. So I'm talking, there is a lot of men. There's a lot of men there. Compared to what Cornwallis has, he is way outnumbered. And he's not used to that. All right? So here's the story. Early on September 28th, Washington leads his army out of Williamsburg, surrounds Yorktown. The French took the positions on the left, while the Americans took the positions of the honor on the right. Position of honor on the right. All right? The Americans and the French spent the night of the 28th sleeping out in the open, while work parties built bridges over marshes that were there. Some of the American soldiers hunted down wild hogs to eat. Now, y'all have seen that show before where they go out and they shoot them wild pigs. There were a lot of them out there. All right? So things were happening. Cornwallis was probably wondering, what in the world is going on out there? You could see the torches, you could see the lights, you could see the campfires, and you could hear the men digging in the ground and hitting to build bridges, hitting wood to build bridges. Cornwallis had his forces occupy the earthworks immediately surrounding the town because he received a letter from General Clinton that he promised relief for 5,000 men within a week, and he had wished to tighten his lines. All right, so hopefully Clinton will be coming with 5,000 men. Guess what? He don't come. He just doesn't come. He doesn't get there. He does not get there. All right. So on September 30th, just a couple days later, the French attacked the British redoubts. In other words, they attack where the British have their cannons. Okay, that's what they're attacking. The skirmish lasts for about 2 hours. Now, from what I understand, the French were repulsed. They were repulsed. In other words, they were sent back, suffering several casualties. Several casualties. On October 1st, the Allies learned from the British deserters that to preserve their food, the British had slaughtered hundreds now of their horses and thrown them on the beach. So these guys were hungry there. I told you they were out of food. They were out of all kinds of supplies. So the British now are killing their own horses to be able to get something to eat. Now, on the night of October 2nd, just a day later, the British opened a storm of fire to cover up the movements of British cavalry to Gloucester, where they were escorted by infantrymen on a foraging party. In other words, they were going to look for food. So they made a diversion, started firing over this way, and these guys went this way, looking for food. On the 3rd, the foraging party, led by guess who? Bannister Tarleton. Bannister Tarleton went out. They collided with Luzon's Legion and John Mercer's, not General Mercer, different Mercer, Virginia militia. Virginia militia, led by the Marquis de Choisy. The British cavalry quickly retreated back behind their defensive lines, losing 50 men, but not Bannister Tarleton. Not Bannister Tarleton. Old Three Fingers, remember he got his 2 fingers cut off? Old Three Fingers didn't do too good, did he? All right, now by October 9th. Now remember, we came way back in September 28th here. By October 9th, all of the French and American guns were in place. All of them. Among the American guns, there were 3 24-pounders, 3 18-pounders, 2 8-inch howitzers, 6 mortars. At 3 p.m., the French guns opened up in the barrage and drove the British frigate, the HMS Guadalupe, across the York River, where she was scuttled to prevent any capture. In other words, they wrecked her on purpose. At 5 o'clock in the afternoon, the Americans' guns opened up. Washington is known to have fired the first gun. Legend is it that it smashed into a table where British officers were eating. How about that? British officers were eating, all of a sudden, bang! They got smashed. Franco-American guns began to tear apart the British defenses. There was a ton of cannons there. Washington ordered that the guns would fire all night so the British could not make any repairs. And they couldn't go to sleep. You can't sleep when you got guns firing all night long. All the British guns on the left were soon finished. They were silenced. Nothing left of them because these guys were good. And Henry Knox, General Henry Knox, he's our artilleryman. He is a dead shot with those cannons. He really is. Now, if you look on your PowerPoint, there's a picture of a gun there. I think it's about an 18-pounder. About an 18-pounder, which means the ball out of it is 18 pounds. But they had some that were 32-pounders. Some of these were as big as bowling balls coming out of there, or even bigger, and exploded. So there is something about a cannonball that you have to understand. They can be a solid shot, just a solid ball, right? A lot of them have timers in them. Now you're saying, well, they didn't have electrics back in that time. I know they didn't have electrics. They didn't need electrics. In the center of the ball, there was a screw that came out. All right? That is where the timer is. So when you screw that back in, there are 2 holes on top of that. One is for a 10-second fuse. One is for a 5-second fuse, roughly. If whichever one you poke, that means that when that ball goes up within 10 seconds or 5 seconds, it's blowing up. Now you might say, 5 seconds? 5 seconds is not very long. You know how fast that ball's traveling? It could blow up in the air and kill people. It could blow up on the ground and kill people. Either way. So they were deadly. They were deadly, absolutely. Especially when you got 30 or 40 of them coming at you at one time. You don't know what to do. All right, so fire on Yorktown from the Allies was very heavy, heavier than ever. And as new artillery pieces, now it's not that they didn't have enough. They brought some more in, okay? More artillery pieces joined the line. Are you getting excited yet? Because this is one heck of a battle. Cornwallis talked with his officers that day, and they all agreed, situation's hopeless. Situation is hopeless. What are we going to do? Well, on the morning of October 17th, now remember, we started September 28th. Now we're looking at October 17th. The drummer appeared, followed by an officer waving a white handkerchief. What's that mean? What's that mean? Do I have it white? What's that mean when they're waving? They're waving a white handkerchief. It means don't shoot. Don't shoot. We just want to talk. We want to talk. This isn't one of your video games where you just shoot the messenger. No, you don't. You want to see what they got to say. So the bombardment ceased. The officer was blindfolded, led behind the Allied lines, and negotiations began on October 18th between 2 British officers and Washington and his men. All right, they came up with something called the Articles of Capitulation, which would mean surrender. Articles of Capitulation means Articles of Surrender. That's what it was. And they were signed, and I want you to know this date, October 19th, 1781. October 19th, 1781. Cornwallis, his British men were declared prisoners of war, promised good treatment in American camps, Hey, these guys were starving, man. And the officers were permitted to return home after taking their parole. Most of them were allowed to keep their swords. They were allowed to keep their swords. All right. At 2 o'clock, the Allied army entered the British positions. The French on the left, and the Americans on the place of honor on the right. On the right. This is how it's done, folks. This is how it's done. Now, Cornwallis refused to meet formally with Washington. He said he was sick or something. Come on, he's a baby. He's a crybaby. All right, this guy hasn't lost any battles, and now all of a sudden he got beat bad because he made some bad decisions. He had a whole diary. Guess what? He's going to sell that and make some money on a book anyway. But he lost honor. He could save his honor by surrendering his sword, but he won't do it. No, he won't do it. He won't do it. He refused to come to the ceremony to surrender, claiming that he was not feeling too well. I bet he wasn't feeling well. Probably had an upset stomach and one heck of a headache. Instead, he sends Brigadier General Charles O'Hara. That was his second in command. He presented the sword of surrender, his sword, to General Rochambeau, the French general. Rochambeau shook his head and said, no, 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 Washington. You give it to Washington. So O'Hara takes his horse over and gives it to Washington. But Washington says, no, 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 I refuse to accept it. What in the world is going on here? He said, since Cornwallis won't come to me, then you can give your sword to my second in command, General Benjamin Lincoln, who had been humiliated by the British in Charleston. He'll accept it. So O'Hara goes over, gives it to General Lincoln. You know what General Lincoln tells him? Thank you. He takes it. He says, you may keep your sword, sir. You may keep your sword. That's class. It's class now. All right, the British soldiers had been issued new uniforms before all this. They've been issued new uniforms. And before the surrender, and until prevented by General O'Hara, some threw down their muskets with the apparent intention of smashing them to pieces. They wanted to destroy all their muskets so nobody else could use them. O'Hara stopped that. He said, stop. It's not honorable. So we're talking a lot about honor here. They were just sore losers. You know, you can be a good winner, but sometimes you got to be a good loser too. Okay, and vice versa. Sometimes you hate to lose, but you have to be a good winner too. So others were apparent to be drinking too much and were drunk. Some were crying. A lot were crying. Okay, grown men crying. Hey, that's just the way it is. You know, sometimes it hits you so hard, it's too much. It's too much, right? 8,000 troops. This is what we got. 8,000 troops. 214 pieces of artillery. Some of them busted up pretty bad. Thousands of muskets. Thousands. They just threw their muskets down. They just set them up real nice and, make them all straight or hand them off to somebody. They just threw them on the ground. Some of them walked right over top of them. 24 transport ships, wagons, horses. Everything was ours now. Everything was ours. So now what? Well, there was a time where these men had to be able to get back on their boats because we have no place to keep them. We can't put them in a prison. We have no prisons. So as they dropped their muskets, they went to get on their ships there. This is like the best part too. When you get back, I'm going to show you this. Unless I can find it, maybe I can send it online here. As they were marching out, they were playing a funeral march, basically. So the song was really depressing. The British were playing this. They always got musicians. The British were playing this funeral march. Lafayette saw this and he told the American band, play a song. Guess what they played? They played Yankee Doodle. Yankee Doodle went to town. The British just hung their heads in shame because the whole time they're marching, they're looking off to the left. They're looking off to the left. They're looking at the French. We don't want to look at these Americans because they look ratty. I mean, their coats are bad. Some of them don't have shoes on. They could never have beaten us. The French, hey, we fought them hundreds of years, and we're going to probably fight them a couple more times. So we'll give them this one this time, but not them. When he played Yankee Doodle, they looked over to the right, and they hung their heads down. Then the men went crazy. Crazy. We'd won. We beat them. The best army and navy in the world, folks. The best. There is nothing that Americans can't do. Nothing. This is the greatest country in the world. Yes, we did have the French help, and we did have Spanish help. But look what we got now. Look what we have now. All right? Whatever happens, never desecrate this flag. Never desecrate this flag. That's honor. We just got done talking about honor. This is honor. This is what we stand for. And Americans, there is nothing that we can't do. Now, we made some mistakes along the way, haven't you? Everybody has. But we continue on to make ourselves better and better and better and help the rest of the world out. That's what we do. So after 1781, now what? There were still some fights going on, not big ones, just little fights going on here and there. They decided we need to end this. So they sent delegates from the Continental Congress over to Paris to meet with the British. Now we're talking about some negotiations here. So I want you to know these three men that we sent over there. John Jay, very smart, John Jay, very smart man. John Adams, and Benjamin Franklin. John Jay, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin. Whew! I couldn't even be in that room with those guys. They're way, way too smart than I am. Way smart. I just like to sit there and listen to them, just to watch. That's what I'd like to do. It took almost 2 years for them to come up with a compromise. 2 years. Why? We won. Just get the heck out. No, it don't work that way. There's a lot of red tape. So 2 years, we came up with the compromise. So I want you to know this date, September 3rd, 1783. Two sides signed a peace treaty. You know what they called it? Treaty of Paris. Now, wait a minute, Mr. Johnson. Didn't we already have a Treaty of Paris? We did, the French-Indian War. Now we got another one. Treaty of Paris, and it ended the American Revolution. But, what about these 13 colonies that become 13 states now? Very interesting. Okay? Let's look at the outline of the treaty. What we get and what they get. First of all, Great Britain, that's England, acknowledges the independence of the colonies and the colonists and removed British troops from American soil immediately. The king has to sign 13 different charters and cancel them and set them free. What does that mean? That means that we have 13 countries on our hands now. Not one. 13 countries. Independent countries. Every one, starting with Virginia, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, on down the line. New England, middle, southern colonies, they're all countries now. Wait, didn't we all fight together? Isn't this the United States of America? Nobody signed no papers to join together. Nobody signed no papers. We joined together to fight this war, but we are still independent states with our own rights. So the king can't just say, okay, the United States, you're free to go. No. There was no United States. Not yet. Each colony was free to go once the king released them. And he did, all 13 of them. Also gave us this. New boundaries will be all the land west of the Appalachian Mountains to the Mississippi River, north from Canada to Florida in the south. So east to west, we're getting all the way to the Mississippi River. Actually, from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River, that's ours. Or whoever want to do with it. Now, whose is it? Well, it's going to be part of this new government that we're going to form because we have to form a new government. Well, we all going to join together? Well, we'll see. We'll see. I mean, we know that we do. That's why we got the stars. All right. But when we do, we need to have a constitution to bind us all together. That's coming up. That's coming up. Now, north to south, we go from Canada to Florida in the south because Florida is given back to Spain. Oh, come on now. We just had Florida and they gave it back to Spain again. Well, Spain did help us out. You can have Florida. What do you got? A bunch of swamps there anyway? So we get Florida. Americans are going to agree to pay loyalists for property that was lost in a war, property that was damaged, and they had to bring a claim to their magistrates in each one of the states. You burned my farm, you killed so many cows, you broke my fence. You want us to pay you for that? You want our state to pay you for that? You're a loyalist? You're lucky you're alive. You're lucky we're allowing you to keep what you have right now. You're right. Because they call them traitors. They call them traitors. And we talked about traitors yesterday. Are there still traitors in this country? Well, of course. Every country has traitors. You just don't know about them yet. You just don't know because they're undercover. Traitor can't be a very good traitor if they keep telling you, hey, I'm a traitor. They're like spies. So they knew that these loyalists were traitors. Word's out now. Word's out. Are we coming to the end now? It's this. Washington rode through the streets in New York now, at the head of his troops. You're waiting for him. Who's they? All the people. They could not wait to see General Washington. So as he came through, they cheered. Everybody went unbelievably crazy. Now, he would go to this big hall, Frontenac Hall, and he would meet all of his officers. Okay, before he did, he met with a couple people. I'm told this. I'm told. Not totally certain. But a story goes, he met with Abraham Woodhead. He was a spy in the Culpeper ring. And Abraham had used up a lot of his own money, had not gotten paid as being a spy for quite a while, lost his farm, lost his father, lost a lot of things. And he came to Washington to see Benjamin Talmadge, who was a friend of his and also was the head of the Culpeper ring. And he said, I want to see General Washington. He says, you're not going to be able to see Washington today. He said, I have to. I have to tell him of my plight here. So he finally gets in. He does see Washington. Washington takes him out by himself to another room. And he explains to me, he says, General, said, it was my honor to do what I had to do. I was a spy for you. He said, but I had a great risk of my own life, the lives of my friends that I lost, and I lost everything. He said, I really need some money. Now, where's Washington to get the money from? Continental Congress is broke. He can't just call up and say, well, listen, I need to get this guy a check. But Washington did do this. How much do you need? He told him whatever the amount was. He reached in his own pocket. He gave it to him. He says, no, General, I'm not asking you for your money. He says, I'll go to the Continental Congress. Washington said, no, you work for me. I will pay you. That's the kind of man he was. That's the kind of man he was. Honor. Again, honor. That's what kind of man he was. Now, Washington addressed his men December 1783. His troops and officers, knowing that they may never see him again, he gave a farewell speech to them. It was pretty good. Pretty good. He said, I never sent you into harm's way that I would not go myself. And that was true. That was true because he was always on the battlefield. He wasn't sitting in the back waiting and watching. He was on that battlefield. He said, I know that I may never see a lot of you again. He says, and I can't come up to every single one of you, but I would be obliged if you would come and take me by the hand. That's what he said. The officers lined up, put their mugs down, they lined up. They went up, shook his hand, some of them embraced him. They were crying. These hardened men that were soldiers were crying because they thought they would never see him again. Some of them been with him for 9 years, 5 years, 2 years, doesn't matter. They loved him, but he lost a lot of battles. It didn't matter. He won the war. Without Washington, they wouldn't have won that war. They loved him, and they cried, thinking, can't believe it's over with. And we actually won. Now what? Go home, he said. Go home, be good citizens. Washington did. He returned home to Mount Vernon, and his wife, Martha. So understand that he returned home to Mount Vernon. That's his home. That's where he went. He wouldn't be there long. No. Wouldn't be there very long because country needs him. What country? This new country they'll call United States of America. They need him. And he'll be pulled back into it again. And what a man to have in charge. What a man to have in charge. We haven't seen too many like him. No, we haven't. Haven't seen too many like him because I'll tell you one thing. He put America first. He put America first. And the people first. Not George Washington. The people first. That's America first. And he loved what was about to happen. He loved the idea of it. But could he control it? Could he control it? That's the next chapter. It's getting exciting, I'm telling you. It's going to get exciting. And we're going to go back over some of these little fine points here before we leave this chapter. When we get back Monday, the heat's going to be fixed, believe me. But I want you to stay with me because we're taking a journey here. You're not going to regret it. You're going to like it. You're going to like it. So that's all I'm going to say